Hello, sinners and tales. Sappho, it's your hostess with the mostest, Narcissa Deville, and I filmed this out of order. I'm so sorry. I have to say this, and I'm not I'm not trying to be a bitch or whatever, but I don't know what YouTube wants from me anymore, right? Because I feel like historically speaking, the best videos on my channel tend to be like fandom related videos, which is valid. I love making fandom related videos, but for whatever reason, last week's video, which was a video essay that I really worked hard on and I thought was really well done, just stagnated. And I don't know why. And so I'm just like not sure what YouTube wants from me anymore. And it gets frustrating because I just want to make content that people give a shit about. And like, this is the thing, right? Okay, so so I wrote a whole script for this video. This, like, as I'm sitting here deciding what video I'm going to talk about, I'm like changing my mind up. I had a whole script, but I'm going to try and go off the cuff and just go based on my feelings because that's kind of what I do a lot too. So here's my frustration, right? Because, and let me start with some background, right? I've talked a lot about writing fan fiction. My whole video last week was about writing fan fiction and kind of my, I don't know, just my journey with writing fan fiction. So one of the things that happened to me recently, which is within the past month, of course they're doing the fucking lawn right now. Ugh, okay, well, whatever, I'm just gonna deal with it. So one of the things that happened to me within the last couple months, I don't remember when exactly this started, but I'm not proud of this, right? Let me just start by saying that. I am not proud of this fact. This is not something that I don't find embarrassing, but I recently had a situation where I found myself feeling very jealous of a fellow fandom writer. And I'm not going to say who they are. I'm not going to imply anything about the story that they wrote. I'm just going to say that so what happened was, let me give you some backstory, right? What happened was, so here's what happened. Right? So for a little bit of context, there's a lot of fics, right? You know, I'm on Tumblr, as I have discussed many a time. I'm on Tumblr, but I'm also on the fandom section of Twitter. I am on the fandom section of Instagram. I like to get my fandom everywhere that I can, right? You know, I particularly like to look for stuff that relates to the pairing that I prefer, right? So I'm looking specifically for radiodust content. And so one thing I see in that often is anytime someone is talking about a fic that everyone has to read, that they're obsessed with, that they want to share and show off, and like they want to talk about it, right? I see that a lot. I'm in different sections of the fandom. I'm not just in, you know, like I said, I'm in Tumblr, but I'm also in like fandom spaces on Instagram, fandom spaces on Twitter. You know, I'm not just exclusively on Tumblr. So I see these things where people talk about fics that they particularly like and they want to talk about. And more often, not even just more often than not, just like every single time that I have seen them, it's always been for someone else's fic, right? I've never like stumbled upon someone recommending my fic in the wild, which is fine. Like, no one owes me a read. No one owes me a recommendation. Like, I'm not so full of myself that I think that. But at the same time, I think any artist will tell you, like, it's nice to be recognized. It's nice to be told that people like what you're doing. So for whatever reason, there was this one particular fic that I kept seeing everywhere. I saw it on Tumblr. I saw it on Twitter. I saw it recommended like privately to me. Like people would send me a DM about how I should read this story. And I'm just like, I felt like the story was haunting me. And then I was seeing fan art of it on Twitter. And I was like, no one's ever made fan art of my work. That's kind of sucks. And so I just kind of got into this spiral, not of like, you know, oh, getting angry at anyone else. It was more like, wow, like I really feel, I just kind of got into this like mediocrity spiral, I guess you would call it, because I felt like, why is my work not good enough that people don't recommend it? Why is my work not something that people have made fan art for? Like, why is this something that, like, I feel like my work does good numbers, and I know that, like, you're not supposed to look at the numbers. I get it. But I'm just like, what is it about my work that, like, people just don't, I don't see it getting recommended. Now, mind you, I do understand that I am not in every single space where people are talking about fandom stuff. Just because I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr does not mean that I'm seeing every single discussion that goes on about fandom stuff. Like, that's literally impossible. I literally cannot be everywhere at once. I don't even know what that would take. But I'm not capable of being everywhere at once. I'm just not. I don't have a trying to think of the non-fandom redacted term for this. I don't have any kind of like time device that would allow me to be in multiple places at once, right? I can only be where I can be, and I can't see everything. And even in spaces like Tumblr and Twitter and Instagram, you can't see every single post that is talking about a specific fandom thing. Like, it's just impossible. And I logically recognize that. I logically recognize that A, it has nothing to do with me. B, as I said before, no one owes me that view or that look or that recommendation or that fan art or anything else. And I also know that I cannot see everything all the time. So there is a possibility that there are people recommending my work that I'm just not seeing. But you sort of go down that like spiral of like, wow, there's so much work that is like so beloved. People are constantly recommending it. They're recommending it to me. They're recommending it to you. They're recommending it everywhere. And I'm like, why is that not my work? Right? Because this is something that I have always loved to do. I've always, like, this has been my dream and my passion for decades. And not to say that that's not true for literally everyone else who's writing fan fiction, because obviously you're doing this for free. You kind of, it kind of has to be your passion to some extent, right? But like, ow, for whatever reason, I was getting into my head about this. And I'm saying in the past tense because I am over this, but I wanted to make this video because I feel as though this experience is actually a lot more common than anyone wants to talk about, right? Nobody wants to talk about the fact that sometimes you just kind of get jealous for no reason over other people's accomplishments, right? And I know that, like, the logical thing, right, is you should never compare yourself to someone else because you're not them and they're not you. And all of these very logical responses, very like, I know the answer. I know that I shouldn't compare myself to other people. I know that what I'm creating is just as good as anyone else's. And I know that my work speaks for itself, whatever, whatever, whatever. But the feelings are kind of what, like, as for anyone who wants to talk about how, like, your feelings don't matter, blah, blah, blah. Like, how you feel about something doesn't change just because you know the logic, right? Anxiety doesn't just go away because you know logically that it doesn't make sense. I'm someone who has a lot of anxiety around like doctors and getting blood drawn. And as someone who is trans, I have to get my blood drawn kind of a bit because they need to check your hormone levels and make sure everything is hunky dory, even though I've been on it for a fucking decade and nothing's really changing at this point. But they need to check it, whatever, fine. So like logically I know that people every age group get their blood drawn and it's not a big deal and nothing happens and it's not the end of the world. And yet I have anxiety about it because somewhere my mind has decided that this is the most terrifying thing, and so I'm just scared of it. And then after the fact I'm just kind of like, well, I made that worse than it ever could have been because of my anxiety. So logically, I know that what I'm feeling doesn't make sense. Logically, I know that my anxiety about this does not make sense. But that doesn't change how I feel, right? That doesn't change the feelings that I have. So even though logically I know that it's kind of shitty to be jealous of a fellow fanfic writer who isn't gaining anything more by being recommended more, isn't gaining anything by having people make fan art of them. Like, it's nice to have because it's cool to say that someone made this and it makes you feel special, blah blah blah. But they're not actually gaining anything like in a material sense, and it doesn't take anything away from me in any respect either. And yet, that doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change that feeling of like, wow, maybe I'm just not as good as I think I am. Maybe all of the people who have liked my work, maybe that's not like whatever like your mind goes through, right? You know, you have all these thoughts, let's call them. And, and it's not even like, again, it's not logical. It's totally irrational. And you know this, but that doesn't make them go away. It doesn't change the thoughts. It doesn't, make them stop. It's just, that it's stupid, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're kind of trapped in the stupid, I would say. And it's a really unfortunate place to be in because you can't tell anyone, right? It's kind of embarrassing to be like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm like low-key having a jealousy fit over this fellow fanfic writer because their story is getting more recommended than mine. Like, that's not something you tell people. And honestly, I thought about not making this video at all because I feel like it kind of makes me look like an asshole to even say these things out loud. Like, I don't know. I just kind of feel like saying out loud, I was jealous of a fellow fanfic author because they were getting more attention than me, sounds like something an asshole would say. And so I thought about not making this video for a long, long time. But part of what made me decide that I had to make the video is because of the fact that I feel like this is actually more common than we are willing to let on. And here's the thing, right? And there's a couple of reasons that I think that. There was actually a tweet that I saw from someone who was actually just a fan artist, not even like an author, a fan artist, who was saying that they kind of feel like they wish they could put out work faster because they feel like their work gets attention like for the 5 seconds when it's new and then nobody cares after that, which is actually something that I kind of feel with YouTube as well. There is something interesting that I've seen, there's plenty of YouTube videos that I would say like are not that interesting or are not that special that get a lot of attention. And I'm just like, what the fuck am I not doing right? That some of the times on YouTube, my videos do very, very well. And some of the times, like last week, it's like 87 views and it stagnated. Like, it's very frustrating, I think, when you create art and it doesn't feel like people are appreciating it. And again, logically, I am aware that nobody owes me their views. Nobody owes me their attention. Nobody owes me, a read. Nobody owes me a like or kudos or a comment or anything else that you can think of. Nobody owes that to you just because you created something. Nobody owes you a reblog or a like or anything else. But let's face it, I think as artists, and maybe I'm projecting a lot, but I do think as artists, there is this thing where you spend so much time creating something and the time it takes to consume it is like nothing. It takes no time to consume a piece of art and it takes fucking forever to create art. And sometimes it feels like, especially when you see other people's work getting so much adoration, and you're like, okay, I spent the same amount of time as anyone else, and yet I'm not really getting this. I don't feel like I'm getting this adoration, which again, isn't entirely true or logical either, but that's a whole other point. And yet someone else is getting all of this attention And it's just like, well, why isn't my work good enough? And you do get frustrated, especially when you're sitting there like, okay, well, a new chapter will get attention, but it's not like people are like, it doesn't feel like people are thinking about my work long after it's written. I don't feel like people are, reading it multiple times. It's not a work that anyone's saying like, this is my favorite fic, this changed my life, whatever. I'm like, I know that shouldn't be the goal, and it's not like why I write or anything, but it is something that I think everyone wants to hear. Everyone wants to hear that something they created was meaningful to people. Not just in like, yeah, this was fun for an afternoon. People want to hear that something they created is something that you think about often, is something that keeps you up at night or something like that. Like, there has been fics that I did not like that I still think about. And actually, one of the points of that whole last video was that I find it so interesting how there are fics that I just, even though I'm not even in those fandoms anymore, I still think about those. Like, that is the power of fan fiction, and that is the effect that I want to have on readers. I want them to, even long after they are out of this fandom for whatever reason, if they leave, I mean, not everyone has to, but some people just kind of leave for one reason or another, that long after, they're still thinking about this story. They're still thinking about how much they enjoyed this story. Because that is something that, that is my favorite part about stories. The power of fiction, as it were, fan fiction or otherwise. So that is the effect that I want to have on people. Because I've had so many stories that have stuck with me, fan fiction and otherwise, that I want to have that effect. I want that to be my legacy. Like, isn't that kind of the point? I don't know. Is anyone writing just to write and it doesn't really matter if anyone reads it or likes it? I mean, God, that must be nice. I feel like I put so much pressure on myself. It must be so nice to just like anyone who writes and is like, I don't really care if anyone likes it or if it changes literature in any way or if anybody thinks about this story ever again. I just, wrote it. That must be so nice. And maybe I'm taking my art too seriously. I really do try in general not to do that because I do kind of believe that nothing good can come from that. Nothing good can come from taking your art too seriously. I'm just making sure this is still recording. In my personal opinion, nothing good can come from taking yourself too seriously, right? That just seems like a very, very bad idea. And yet, as I say, I just think as an artist, it's just kind of a natural thing, whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not. It's just a natural thing that you are going to feel the need you want to be remembered. You want your work to be memorable. You want it to have meant something to people, right? And so for me, that means, I want people to give a shit. I want my work, to be seen, to be shared, to be talked about. And, my lid, I don't know where it is. I'll look for it later. So this whole situation of not having people, not feeling like people give a shit. I should clarify that this is all my personal feelings and not really the reality of the situation, because obviously the reality of the situation is my fics are doing fine. There is no world in which I'm not doing fine. You know what I mean? I know I'm being dramatic about this, because the reality is if I look at the numbers, which again, numbers don't mean everything, but if you were to look at the numbers, you would clearly see that this fic and my fic are pretty much doing the same in terms of numbers. So they're a little bit ahead of me, but not by much. So I think this idea that somehow just because they're getting mentioned and getting fan art and all of this, that it's better than my work just isn't matching up with the reality of the situation. And it's not to say that their work isn't great or isn't good, but what I'm saying is like this personal feeling within myself that says like, oh, they're getting more, you know, noticed than me, therefore like my work doesn't matter or something, whatever the fuck my brain is like trying to tell me this week. Like, it's just not reality, right? Like, it's just objectively not reality. So when you can look at the objective reality and say, look, Sissa, you know, like, this just is not objective reality. Objectively, my work is doing the same numbers relatively as this other fic. And, you know, that really, I mean, numbers don't really matter. It's just, I don't know. It's attention. It's like, I want my work to mean something. You know, I'm kind of like going in circles about that. But it really doesn't mean anything substantively. What the fuck am I trying to say? It is a thing that I'm not alone in this feeling, right? And by the by, just as like an added bonus to this conversation, and this is like kind of a twist ending or whatever, and I think it's hilarious. So I looked at the fic just because I was curious, because I think I've read like I've read a little bit of it. I think it was like updating a chapter and I just never kept up with it. But as a interesting side note to this story, they have in the first chapter that their story was partially inspired by a Tumblr post written by me. Like, if that's not the most hilarious ending to this type of story that there could ever be. So, I mean, that's like, it's truly the funniest, most ridiculous ending to this story there could ever be, right? Because it's so laughable that I, you know, am sitting here feeling sorry for myself, feeling like, wow, this story gets so much more attention than anything I've ever written, which is, again, objectively not true, but like in my head, it's getting all this attention more than anything I'm writing. And come to find out, it at least partially exists because of an idea that I came up with on Tumblr that I shared that I wanted to see. So like, you could not make something like that up. And it just goes to show that like, yeah, comparing yourself to someone else is dumb, it's pointless, and it has hilarious results, actually, it turns out. And like, all of this is to say, right, because again, I am still generally embarrassed by this whole story. Like, even though I think it has a funny ending, and like saying that it was at least partially inspired by an idea that I had, I think is kind of hilarious. And I hope the person who made the fic doesn't see this and like feel self-conscious about it. Not like I haven't made like other posts or whatever, so maybe they won't even notice. But like, this isn't me trying to like make anyone feel bad. This isn't me trying to like say any kind of thing. This is literally just me saying like, wow, isn't this embarrassing that I logically know that it does not make sense for me to feel this way, and yet I still have this like vague feeling of like, this story is doing better than mine and I don't feel like I get the same attention and I don't know why. And it makes me feel bad. And like, here's an interesting anecdote, right? I don't know if this was going to be in my original notes. I think at one point it was, and then I took it out. So, and this is anecdotal, interesting. This is interestingly anecdotal because of like the Olympics were very recently, right? But they've done a study of Olympic medalists. And what they found was that the happiest Olympic medalists were the gold, and then the second happiest were the bronze, and silver were the least happy. And basically what they concluded from that was that people who do okay, but don't quite meet their quota are like not as happy as someone who's just happy to be there. You know what I mean? And so in this metaphor, I am perhaps wrongly suggesting that I am similar to someone who wins a silver medal, perhaps wrongly, by suggesting that a fic of mine that did it is still going, by the way, is doing moderately well, is in any way similar to someone who wins a silver medal. Anyway, what I'm saying is, like, you know, but I think this is the thing, right? I think logically or not, a lot of people feel this way, right? Whether or not we are proud of it, whether or not this is something that, like, we want to feel, a lot of people feel this way. A lot of people, when it comes to art, it is very hard not to feel like, wow, I'm just not appreciated. And the thing is, right, because of, like, you know, how my, you know, original fiction, I don't feel like has been seen at all on the whole Kindle Vella, whatever. And yeah, maybe you can say I'm not promoting it enough. I don't know. I'm trying not to, like, shove it down everyone's throat every 5 seconds, because that gets annoying too. But, like, you know, part of the problem is there is just so much content that, like, nobody can possibly read it all. And I do know for a fact, because I've been told privately by people, that I have been told by people privately that, like, some people just don't like to read something while it's ongoing, which to me is totally fair. Like, it's very hard to read a fic while it's in the middle, because you can get lost very easily. So, like, I can respect that. And technically this fic is still ongoing, so I can respect that there are some people who are not going to want to read it yet because of the fact that it's still ongoing. So, like, I can definitely respect the fact that, like, some people aren't necessarily going to want to aren't necessarily going to want to read this book or this story because it's still ongoing, and sometimes that can be a little bit, like, tricky. And I can also respect the fact that I have a habit of sometimes not finishing things that are longer because I get distracted by newer ideas. So, like, I can respect not necessarily trusting me when it comes to fan fiction, not to, like, I don't want to say abandon a story, but, like, get distracted by newer, shinier stories and then kind of forget that the other story exists until someone mentions it again. So, like, I respect that too, if that's the reason. But at the end of the day, as I say, like, no one owes me attention. No one owes me a read. No one owes me a view on YouTube. No one owes me a subscribe or to join my Patreon, patreon.com/NarcissaDeville. Like, no one owes you these things. And I recognize that. I do. Like, it may not seem like it if you watch this video. It may seem like, oh, I'm like, I think I'm it in a bag of chips or whatever. But, like, I do recognize that, like, no one owes me anything, right? And I'm not at all trying to suggest that I think that they do. What I am trying to suggest is that anyone who creates something, there is a hope that people will want to look at it. People will want to see it. People will want to enjoy it. People will want to read it, look at it, you know, whatever it is. Watch the video, listen to the podcast, you know, whatever it is that you're creating. You know, people aren't just creating shit just to, well, okay, I guess I should not say that, because I'm sure there are plenty of people who are creating shit just to create it. Anyone who has ever employed ChatGPT. But, like, for the most part, when you're creating art, you want people to see it. You want people to care and give a shit and to enjoy it, because that's why you create art. And I mean, yeah, part of it is because you needed to make it and you wanted to make it and you wanted it to be in the world. But, like, at least to an extent, you want other people to give a shit too. Because art's not really fun if you've just made it for yourself and no one else sees it. Otherwise, you just write something and never let anyone read it in the first place. And, like, I've done that for years, and I can tell you from experience, it's not that fun. You know what I mean? Like, it is not actually that fun to write exclusively for yourself and not let anyone see it. It is not that fun to create exclusively for yourself and like, you know, the only one who's reading your book is you, your dog, and your mom. Like, that is not actually that fun. And not because my mother isn't supportive, it's just because, like, it's not the same. Like, she doesn't have to like my work, but there is part of you that kind of feels like if your parent or your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever is reading something of yours and they really like it, you're like, there is that knee jerk to be like, yeah, but you have to like it, which is not true, but you know, there is that feeling of like, you have to like it. So I find it harder to take your opinion seriously, which is kind of fucked up. I can admit that. Like, I can totally admit that is fucked up of me to think that, like, if someone likes my work and is related to me, they can't possibly mean that. Wow, hiccups. That if someone is related to me and likes something that I do, that they can't possibly mean that. Like, that's kind of fucked up of me to think. But that is like a knee-jerk reaction that I and other people have, right? And so, like I said, the point of me making this video, the reason I actually decided to make this video instead of any other video that I could have made, and I did have a different video in mind for like a brief second, but the reason that I ultimately stuck to this idea is because I feel as though this is just more relatable than I think people are willing to admit. Oh God, let me check this. Okay, so I was at 27 plus, I guess 47 would be 20 minutes. Okay, I'm just trying to check, sorry. Like, I feel like people don't want to say out loud that they feel this way, right? I think a lot of people don't want to say out loud that there are times when you look at other artists and you know you shouldn't compare yourself, and you know that it's not going to do you any good to compare yourself to any other artist. It's not going to do you any good to compare yourself to anybody else, even if they're in the same field, even if they're writing the same type of thing as you. Comparing yourself is never a good idea because it's only going to make you miserable. And yet, I just feel like it's something that we all do. Whether or not we admit to it, whether or not we are proud of it, a lot of us do it because you just can't help it. It's human nature. Comparing yourself to someone else, comparing yourself to someone else's story, whatever, it happens. I think, you know, even as a trans person, I think when you first start to transition, you compare yourself to other people. You compare yourself to their transness. You compare yourself, you know, if you've had surgery, you're going to compare results. You're going to compare what estrogen gave you versus what it gave someone else. You're going to compare voices and everything. And you shouldn't, and you know you shouldn't, but you're going to do it anyway because that's just like what it means to be alive, I guess. And again, it is not something that I'm proud of, and it's not something that I'm saying like, yeah, you should absolutely do this, like this is a good thing for you to do. It's just kind of a reality. And I think that like we have to be willing to discuss this, right? I think we have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, this is a thing that we do, and we need to figure out a way past that. We need to figure out a way to not do that, but also like, how do we get through it, right? Because if you're going to do it anyway, you need to figure out how you're going to get through it, how you're going to find the will to create, right? Or the will to exist, knowing that other people are maybe getting more attention than you, or maybe getting more visibility than you, or different results than you, whatever, right? You have to find a way to keep going. The alternative is just like, what? Stop existing? Like, that's not gonna happen. That's not, you know, the right answer either. So like, you have to find a way to keep moving on, keep on keeping on, and like exist in this world. You have to be able to exist. You have to be able to deal with the fact that sometimes some people are just going to get more attention than you. Some people are going to have better results than you. They're going to, whatever it is that you're trying to compare yourself to another person, it's just going to be, some people are just going to do better. And you have to be able to be okay with that. So, and here's the thing, as I've said, this video is obviously talking about my experience in the past tense because I did get over it. I eventually sat myself down and said, look, bitch, you know, like, this is stupid. I knew it was stupid all along, and I still kind of let myself feel some type of way. Then I said, okay, we're done with this. And that's like a gross oversimplification. Let me not pretend that I wasn't like frustrated by this. And then I haven't felt this frustration kind of a couple of times in fandom spaces, because this is not the first fan fiction that has been like recommended to me everywhere and that I feel like is kind of haunting me, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But it is a sort of thing that, like, when I actually sat down and looked at the numbers and realized we're not that different, but also that doesn't really matter, and also I do get a lot of love and attention on my work. And, like, I think those are all things that you have to kind of remind yourself. And I know this is going to sound reductive, and I know this is going to sound new agey and all this other shit. But one thing I have learned, and one thing I will stand behind no matter how ridiculous it sounds, okay? Just bear with me. You gotta have a gratitude journal. I know how it sounds. I'm gonna make a whole video about like law of attraction, manifestation, and all of that. That is a video that's coming. I've been planning that. I have a whole script. I just want to make sure everything's finalized and tight. It's probably gonna be next week that I'm gonna do it. So like, I know how all that sounds, right? I know that like, it sounds reductive, it sounds basic, it sounds kind of dumb. But for me, and especially when you consider something like, you know, comparison to other people and how that's only going to hold you back because you're just not them, no matter what. No matter how far ahead you think they are. And by the way, there's going to be people who are not where you are who are going to compare themselves to you, but you're not seeing that because you're you. And for all you know, that person that you're thinking is so great and you're comparing yourself to them, they may be comparing themselves to you. You have no idea. There's just no way to know. Ignoring all of that, I think having a gratitude journal to say, look, this is what I do have. This is what I do know. Let's say, for instance, you have this gratitude journal, and let's take me, for example, because I think that's the easiest thing. I'm not going to like make up some for instance of what you would do. I'm just going to go for my example, right? So if I have a gratitude journal, which I do, I'm going to say, you know, I am grateful for the people who do like my work, who do go out of their way to comment on my work regularly and tell me how much they like it. I am grateful for the people who regularly tell me that they enjoy my work and enjoy what I do and read every chapter, watch every video, and all of these other things. I'm grateful for those people. I am grateful for the people who do take the time to interact with my content. I am grateful for the people who do take the time to let it be known that they like my work and that this has meant something to them and this was emotional, it made them cry, it made them laugh, whatever. That is something that I am grateful for. And honestly, too, I'm grateful for the fact that I like my work. Because despite all of this conversation earlier, despite the fact that I do have times where my brain is an asshole to me, I actually do like what I'm putting out. And that was not always something that I could say. For a long, long time in my writing career or writing life, whatever you want to call it, I did not always like what I wrote. I had a long, long time where I did not like what I wrote. I would write it, I would look at it, I would think, this is stupid, this is gross, this is ugly, just whatever. I didn't like it. And I didn't know why. I just didn't like it. And that's a very frustrating thing to feel when you work so hard on shit and you've been doing it for as long as I have. Knowing that I spent so long hating my work is just frustrating. And especially when I now look back on a lot of that work that I hated, I'm like, that's actually not that bad. It's actually pretty good. And like, yeah, maybe it could use some editing, but like the bare bones were there. So, like, my point in saying all this is that comparing myself to other people is just, it's a losing game. You're not going to be happy doing it. And not even just that, you don't know that the person you're comparing yourself to isn't comparing themselves to you. You don't know that there's other people who aren't comparing themselves to you. So you just kind of have to say, you know what? I'm doing what I'm doing, and you know, if I like what I'm doing, that's what has to matter. And that isn't to say that you don't want people to enjoy your work, because of course you do. And that isn't to say that people don't enjoy your work. And that's part of what I think a gratitude journal is really good for, because it allows you to kind of sit there and say, okay, I know what I feel like I don't have, but what do I actually have that I can actually look to and say, wow, this is an amazing thing. I have a lot of things to be grateful for. And sometimes when you physically write them down, and I do mean on paper, because as much as I know everyone likes to do things digitally, there is so much science, apparently, that says writing things down is just kind of better for you. I feel like I'm seeing that a lot in like science and articles. I will say that if you don't want to write shit down by hand, whatever, it's fine. Like, I'm not the handwriting police. I don't give a shit enough. But as someone who likes to write things down by hand, I kind of will take a study like that and be like, okay, see, look, I have my reason. It says science, writing things down is better. And I think if you take the time, and this is not an exclusive thing, this is not something that I think is like, again, it's not a universal truth, but I'd like to think that for the most part, if you take the time to write down the things you are grateful for, if you take the time to remind yourself of the things that you actually do have, more often than not, I think you will be happier for it, at least in my experience. Again, I know it's very like out there, like kind of nonsensical nonsense. I have very mixed feelings about this. Again, I'm going to get into that in a future video. But the point is, at least for me, if nothing else can be said of gratitude, I feel like gratitude journaling, wow, I said that weird. If nothing else can be said, I feel like gratitude journaling makes me feel happier for the most part. I've had like many points within this video. My main point is this. Just don't compare yourself to other people. I know that's so reductive to just end this all with like, just don't compare yourself to anyone else because nobody's you. Like that's so fucking reductive. Like, let me just say this, right? I'm getting onto a tangent, whatever. But like, what is that like early 2000s or 2010 saying that was like, just be you because everyone else is already taken. And like, don't get me wrong. I do kind of love that. But at the same time, it's a little reductive. Like, it's a little bit reductive. So when I say don't compare yourself to other people, I'm not inherently saying, like, don't compare yourself to other people because you're the only you there is. I'm actually saying don't compare yourself to other people because you're gonna drive yourself up the fucking wall. Okay, anyway, thank you all so much for watching this video if you got through it. You can like this video, subscribe, comment. You know the drill at this point. I feel like I say this all the fucking time. You know the drill. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. I mean, people are subscribing, so I have to give credit to that. You can also join my Patreon, patreon.com/NarcissaDeville. All of my tiers are under $5, so go check that out. And yeah. Till next time, stay devilish and see you next Tuesday. I didn't even do my intro this video. Fuck.